Fog clung to the stones of St. Peter's Square as thick as regret. You can almost taste the smoke before you see it. Black, sour, curling into the sky like a question without an answer. Amid the hush of the morning crowd, a single white dove hovered on the lintel of the Sistine Chapel doorway, its feathers pristine against the granite. It didn't flinch when the wind roared through colonnades or when a sudden gust sent scarves flying. It didn't even blink at the black plume that signaled another inconclusive vote. For 3 hours, it simply watched. Cardinal Paolo Moretti pressed his palm against the chapel's cool marble, his fingers trembling. He'd been here before. He could recite every ritual, every whispered prayer. But today, the ritual had lost its meaning. Today, the chapel felt hollow. The chants that once swelled his heart now echoed emptily in his ears. The ache in his knee reminded him of the shrapnel that would never be removed, a souvenir from a war he thought he'd left behind. Yet this phantom pain was nothing compared to the emptiness that shadowed his chest since his brother's funeral 5 months ago. He watched the dove's head tilt slightly, as if listening to secrets only it could hear. Other cardinals murmured around him, voices low and urgent. Alliances whispered like deals in a back room, ambitions sharper than the marble floor beneath their feet. Some spoke of modernizing the church, others of preserving ancient doctrines at all costs, but all of them spoke over the whisper of something deeper, an absence, a thread pulled too taut. Paolo had come hoping for clarity. Instead, he felt like a man chasing a phantom down an empty corridor. Behind him, the grand frescoes of Renaissance masters stared down. Saints in gold halos, apostles with solemn gazes. He used to draw strength from their faces. Today they looked like strangers. He sank into a stone bench, clutching the prayer beads his brother had given him on the day he joined the order. He fingered each bead with a mechanical devotion, reciting words that felt hollow on his tongue. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. Evil. He could almost taste its bitterness at the back of his throat, a reminder of the corruption he'd uncovered years ago in distant parishes, a network of cover-ups, of silenced victims. He'd tried to expose it, to wrestle the darkness into the light, but the church had buried those wounds as carefully as it hid centuries of scandal. A gasp rippled through the square outside, sharp as breaking glass. Cardinals shifted around Paolo, eyes flicking toward the windows. He rose, heart pounding, and joined the others at the stained glass portals. There, in the amber glow of early afternoon sun, the dove's silhouette was etched into colored panes, a sentinel of white wings against crimson and sapphire. A handful of cardinals crossed themselves. Others pressed their palms to their hearts. Somewhere behind him, someone wept. Paolo swallowed. He remembered his brother's laughter one summer evening, tossing breadcrumbs to the wild doves in their hometown piazza. The memory felt like another lifetime. Before the war, before the grief, before the silence had settled in. He looked at the dove, perched so still it seemed carved from the chapel itself. What did it want from them? The air shifted as another plume of smoke billowed black. Murmurs of disappointment rose, half angry, half hopeful. But no one moved to leave. They remained beneath the dove, bound by something neither doctrine nor politics could explain. Paolo realized he felt the same pull they did, an unspoken invitation to pause, to listen. Memories bled into the present. He saw himself as a child, chasing his brother through olive groves, his brother's voice calling him back to home. He saw the day they buried their parents, their shoulders brushing as they carried the casket. And he saw the moment the telegram came, telling him his brother lay wounded abroad. He'd prayed for healing then, voice raw and desperate, but healing hadn't come. Only loss, only silence. He stepped outside the chapel for the first time in hours. The crowd parted like the sea before him. Faces from every corner of the world turned upward, waiting for a sign. Candles flickered in the hands of pilgrims. A nun pressed her lips against a wooden barrier, tears staining her habit. Tourists held phones aloft. Cameras focused on the dove that refused to move. The scene was surreal, half documentary, half dream. Paolo climbed the shallow steps, each one echoing beneath his cassock. His limp felt heavier now, each step a reminder of battles fought and ghosts carried. When he reached the dove, it met his gaze directly. Its eyes were deep, boundless pools that seemed to hold every sorrow and every hope of the human heart. In that long, silent moment, Paolo's grief and guilt and longing swirled into a single fierce ache. He whispered his brother's name, Matteo, and felt the word hang between them, weightless and urgent. The dove canted its head as if acknowledging him, and then just once it tilted its wings, not to fly but to gesture toward the crowd. A murmur spread. Paolo realized the bird wasn't waiting for white smoke. It was waiting for something deeper. He took a breath, crisp with possibility. Maybe it was mercy, maybe it was grace, maybe it was the fragile thread that tied human hearts to the divine, a reminder that God often speaks in stillness. He stepped back, eyes wet. Around him, cardinals exchanged looks of wonder. The grand ritual of choosing a shepherd for the world had become a pilgrimage into their own hearts. Paolo folded his hands, letting the beads slip from his fingers. They lay on the marble step, forgotten. For the first time that day, he felt something shift inside, a flicker of purpose he thought he'd lost. He thought of Matteo's laughter, of olive groves, of breadcrumbs scattered on sunlit stones. He thought of the injustices he'd witnessed, the voices silenced by power and fear. And he thought of the dove, steadfast, silent, refusing to leave until something changed. He raised his head, shoulders squared, and moved back inside. The frescoes seemed to glow in a new light, as if the saints themselves leaned forward to watch. He walked past the cardinals, past the scented candles and incense smoke, and took his place among them for the evening vote. When the ballots were cast and the smoke curled out black once more, Paolo didn't feel defeat. He felt a stirred resolve, a quiet conviction that the church needed more than politics today. It needed a heart that remembered how to mourn and how to hope. As the bells tolled to close the day, Paolo pressed his palm to the chapel wall, exactly where the dove had sat. He closed his eyes and breathed in the ancient stone, the weight of centuries now lightened by a single moment of grace. You can feel it too, can't you? That pull in your chest, that quiet question rising in your heart. If you've ever been broken, forgotten, or left behind, stick around. Because tomorrow, when those doors open again, something will change, and you won't want to miss it. If you believe in miracles hiding in stillness, hit subscribe and share this moment with someone who needs hope. He woke before dawn, the chapel's stone still warm from yesterday's sun. A low haze curled over the square like a promise unspoken. Paolo laced his cassock around him and stepped onto the terrace, the city's lights fading beneath the gathering light. The dove still perched there, silhouette pale against the pale sky. Its gaze was unwavering, as if it had a secret too profound for words. He hesitated, breath shallow, then approached with measured steps, each one an echo of the determination that now drove him forward. Inside, the cardinals assembled in hushed anticipation. Candles flickered, tossing dancing shadows across walls carved with decades of faith. Paolo felt the weight of their eyes, some hopeful, others skeptical, yet he no longer felt the burn of scrutiny. He carried a new purpose, braced by the silent counsel of a small white bird. The air smelled of incense and old stone. Each inhalation reminded him of every moment he had almost given up, before the dove showed him otherwise. As the doors closed, a hush settled over the chapel, a living thing, pulsing between breaths. Paolo's heart thudded, loud as distant thunder. No chant, no fanfare announced the morning vote. Only the sound of ballots sliding into a wooden box. When it was over, the smoke curled from the chimney, gray this time, neither promise nor despair, but something in between. Gasps and murmurs followed, many bows of heads, a few silent tears. But Paolo felt neither elation nor disappointment. He felt the gravity of a truth revealed. This conclave was no longer about power, it was about presence. His mind drifted back to the orphanage in Naples where he first met Father Giuseppe, a man whose gentle smile hid the scars of hidden cruelty. Children locked in closets, punishments whispered in the dark. Paolo had vowed to expose those who harmed the innocent, but the inertia of the institution had swallowed his fervor. He remembered the boy whose tears stained the back of his cassock, whose voice cracked as he begged for mercy. That boy had slipped through the cracks, forgotten by the world. Paolo closed his eyes at the memory, the pain still raw. The dove flitted away at the boat's end, circling the chapel before alighting on the balustrade near Paolo. Its presence was an invitation. "Follow me." He traced its gaze toward a narrow doorway hidden in the shadows. No cardinal dared to stray from the ritual, but Paolo felt compelled. He slipped through the arch as if guided by an unseen hand, descending a spiral staircase carved by centuries of footsteps. Each step down brought a silence so complete it roared in his ears. At the bottom he emerged into a dim corridor lined with aged wooden doors. Faint voices drifted through one of them, murmurs of doubt, fear, something more sinister. He pressed his ear to the door and recognized the whispered names of priests long suspected of betrayal. Father Romano, accused of diverting funds meant for refugee aid. Brother Lorenzo, rumored to have silenced accusations with threats. The words were hushed, but the guilt was palpable. A candle flickered on the other side, casting a pale glow that seeped through the cracks. His pulse quickened. The dove alighted on the sill behind him, talons clicking softly against stone. It cocked its head in encouragement. Paolo glanced at the heavy door. He knew the cost of unveiling truth, the cost of challenging the hierarchy. Yet the dove's unwavering stare stripped away hesitation. He pushed the door open. Inside, 3 men stood around a small table strewn with papers. Ledgers, ledger fragments, envelopes soaked with black ink. Maps marking dioceses where aid shipments vanished. Names of children, widows, elderly congregants who never received promised care. One man lunged for the papers as Paolo entered. Another crossed himself. The third froze, mouth ajar in surprise. Paolo stepped forward, voice steady. "These belong to the people who trusted us." A thrum of panic rippled through the room. The man with the papers gripped them like a shield. "Cardinal, this is," he stammered. "This is unseemly." Paolo's gaze flicked to the ledger, then back to the man. "Unseemly is betrayal. I will take these with me." His words felt foreign on his lips, resolute, unyielding. The dove fluttered its wings, a whisper of white against the dimness. He seized the papers and turned. One priest barged past him, blocking the staircase. Paolo met his eyes, cold, unrepentant. The priest's voice was quiet but lethal. "You'll ruin us all." Paolo's heart pounded. The memory of Matteo's funeral rose before him, grief so heavy he'd sunk to his knees in the chapel garden. He refused to be swallowed by fear again. He glanced toward the dove perched on the stair's bottom step, and something in him surrendered to courage. He bolted past the priest, clutching the papers. The corridor fractured into whispers behind him, footsteps echoing as alarms of scandal shrieked in silence. He ascended the stairs 2 at a time, each step fueled by every injustice he'd witnessed, every voice he'd promised to protect. At the top, the light of morning spilled in, gentle, renewed. The chapel's heavy doors stood before him, guardians of both tradition and truth. He pushed them open. The congregants paused, cardinals, guards, attendants, caught in a moment of curious stillness. Paolo stepped into the light, papers held high like testimony. The dove swooped down, landing on his shoulder, its warmth startling. Gasps rippled through the assembly. Some recoiled in shock, others in awe. Paolo felt all eyes on him, yet his focus was singular, the dove, and the story it had compelled him to uncover. "Brothers, he began, voice echoing through vaulted arches. "We convened to choose a shepherd, but we have ignored the lambs we were meant to protect." He laid the ledgers on the altar's edge. "These records expose betrayal and silence. Today, I choose mercy over ambition. I choose truth over comfort." His words hung in the incense-laced air, heavy as confession. A cardinal seated near the front rows. His face was lined with years of negotiation, compromise, sacrifice. He spoke slowly. "Cardinal Moretti, what you propose, it defies centuries of order." Paolo squared his shoulders. "Then let order be redefined by compassion." The silence that followed was electric. The dove hopped from his shoulder to the altar, tilting its head toward the seated conclave, as if reminding them whom they serve. Outside, the chimney released another plume, this one white, pure as hope. The crowd erupted in muted awe. witnesses to a miracle they did not fully understand. Within the chapel, cardinals shifted, debating fury and fear and a spark of something audacious: change. Paolo felt a tremor beneath his feet, as if the very foundations of the church trembled with possibility. His throat tightened. He thought of Matteo's laughter again, the way his brother's lightness had once lifted every burden. He thought of the children left in cloisters, the widows abandoned, the faithful who whispered prayers to empty walls. He thought of the dove that refused to move until justice was spoken. And he felt in that moment the pulse of something larger than any conclave, an awakening of conscience. Footsteps approached. A hush fell deeper than before. Paolo's heart thundered. He scanned the faces. Some were stern, eyes hard as flint. Others were wet with tears. Tears he recognized, the tears of recognition, of remembrance, of redemption. He raised his hand. I ask you now, will we seal holiness behind these walls, or will we carry it into the world where it's needed most? The dove cooed softly, a ripple of sound that threaded through the vaulted ceiling. Paolo held his breath. Then, an answering murmur. One cardinal, then another. Then a chorus of voices. We stand with truth. Paolo's chest filled with warmth so fierce it stung. In that chorus, he heard Matteo's laughter, the cries of the innocent, the whispers of every soul longing for mercy. Outside, the bells tolled, soft at first, then clear and resonant, signaling not the end of a vote, but the beginning of a movement. Paolo bent to retrieve the ledgers, careful not to disturb the dove. The bird watched him with bright eyes as if acknowledging a pact sealed between them. He straightened, facing the conclave anew. The air shimmered with the promise of renewal. Paolo realized he no longer feared the weight of his title. Instead, he felt its potential, like a torch passed from his brother's hands to his own. His gaze lifted to the frescoes above, saints painted in reverence, no longer distant observers, but witnesses to this moment. A hush settled again, but it was different now, expectant, hopeful. Paolo spoke softly. Words meant more for his own heart than for any listener. We have forgotten to feel. Today we remember. For a heartbeat, time suspended. Then a cardinal approached, extending his hand. Paolo accepted it, fingers brushing like the first note of a hymn. Around them, the conclave stirred, shifts of stance and mind echoing like ripples on water. The dove flapped its wings and rose from the altar, circling once before vanishing into the oculus above. Silence reigned, yet it sang. Paolo closed his eyes, feeling the echo of the dove's flight in his soul. The chapel walls seemed to breathe with him, alive with the memory of what had passed. He tucked the ledgers beneath his arm and turned toward the crowd beyond the stained glass. Faces pressed to the panes, watching, waiting. He lifted his gaze to meet theirs. In every pair of eyes, he saw fragments of his own journey, loss, longing, the hunger for a sign that heaven still spoke. He nodded once, a simple gesture heavy with promise. And as the first rays of sunlight ignited the chapel's stained glass into flames of color, Paolo whispered, "This is only the beginning." The hush deepened, an invitation for you to stay, to witness what comes when courage and compassion collide at the heart of power. What happens next may just change everything. The morning light filtered through stained glass, splashing the chapel's marble floor in shards of ruby and gold. Cardinal Moretti stood by the altar, the weight of the ledgers pressed against his chest like a shield. Beyond the oculus, the sky was a vault of pale blue, so ordinary it felt miraculous. The dove had vanished overnight, leaving behind only the echo of its presence. In its place, a quiet resolve hummed through the conclave's corridors, an undercurrent of possibility that thrummed in Paolo's veins. He moved through hushed aisles toward the gathering of cardinals, some lingering in small circles, others kneeling in silent prayer. Their faces reflected a spectrum of emotions: awe, confusion, fear, hope. Paolo unclasped the heavy book of records beneath his arm and laid it on a small lectern. The binding creaked like a confession. A single spotlight of morning sun illuminated the pages, revealing rows of names and figures that spelled out years of neglect and betrayal. A shiver ran through the assembly. Paolo inhaled slowly, feeling the chapel's cool air expand in his lungs. "Brothers," he began, voice resonant against vaulted arches. "We convened to choose a shepherd, but we found something more urgent, a test of our own souls." He let his gaze sweep the circle. "These records, they do not belong to a single diocese or a single era. They belong to every faithful soul we vowed to serve, and they call us to account." There was a murmur, low and uncertain, like wind rustling dead leaves. From somewhere in the back, a cardinal cleared his throat. "What do you propose, Cardinal Moretti?" His tone was polite, but the question carried the heft of thunder. Paolo closed his eyes, picturing Matteo's gentle smile. He felt the pulse of memory in his fingertips. "I propose transparency. I propose that we release these truths, acknowledge our failures, and commit to rebuilding trust." He paused, letting the words settle. "I propose mercy for victims long silenced, for communities forgotten, and for ourselves." The chapel held its breath. Moments stretched like taffy. Then the first vote was cast, an echo of wood against stone. Paolo watched as one cardinal after another stepped forward, casting ballots not for a candidate, but for accountability. Each vote felt like a promise, a spark catching dry wood. Outside, the square held its own tension. Crowds gathered, breath visible in the crisp air, eyes turned toward the chimney. Gray smoke billowed again, heavier than before. A collective intake of breath rose from the square's marble terraces. Paolo felt a tremor beneath his cassock, as if the church itself were adjusting to a new axis. He leaned over the lectern, voice softening. "We must move quickly. This moment was not born of politics, but of conscience. We cannot allow it to fade like a forgotten dream." Behind him, the frescoes seemed to sway, to lean closer as though listening. The faces of saints, once distant observers, now bore witness. Paolo felt the brush of inspiration against his soul. He remembered a night in the refugee camp outside Damascus, where he knelt by a child whose eyes had seen too much. The child clutched a tattered rosary, fingers white as bone. Paolo had promised then to carry their stories home. He realized that promise had led him to this very moment. A hush descended as the final votes were counted. Paolo's heart hammered so loudly he feared others would hear. The leaden doors creaked open, and a servant emerged, clutching a small brass key. Paolo approached and unlocked a hidden panel beside the altar, a cabinet he'd discovered on his clandestine descent the day before. Inside, beneath a velvet cloth, lay a tarnished silver chalice etched with the words, "Pro Misericordia," for mercy. Paolo lifted it gently, the chalice's rim glowing in the sunbeam. He turned to the cardinals. "This chalice has stood empty for too long. Today, let us fill it with our commitment to the vulnerable. Let it be a symbol of our resolve." With deliberate grace, he poured a vial of scented oil into the chalice, anointing oil blessed in quiet ceremony. The fragrance spiraled upward, mingling with incense in a silent benediction. Tears pricked the eyes of several cardinals. Paolo felt a weight lift from his chest, the weight of every secret preserved in shadows, every compromise that stifled compassion. He raised the chalice. "By this act, we consecrate not only wine, but our own hearts to truth and mercy. May our church remember what it means to see, to feel, to heal." An elderly cardinal, his face mapped with lines of decades spent in debate, stepped forward. He placed his hand on Paolo's shoulder and spoke, voice trembling. "You have reminded us of something we lost. You have restored our purpose." He closed his eyes and others followed. Soft prayers tangled with the scent of oil. In that sacred space, a bridge was built from past failures to future hope. Outside, the smoke turned white, pure, luminous. Murmurs of joy rose from the crowd. Candles flickered in windows. For the first time in days, the square felt alive with anticipation, not for a name on a ballot, but for a promise reborn. Paolo descended from the altar to the crowd gathered at the chapel doors. Children pressed close, their eyes bright with wonder. A nun knelt, pressing her forehead to the stone, whispering thanks. Tourists lowered cameras, realizing they were witnessing something sacred beyond any photograph. A hush settled, a shared breath held in awe. A young Swiss guard offered Paolo a simple loaf of bread and a cup of water, a gesture both humble and profound. Paolo accepted them with a nod. He bit into the bread, salt and earth and life mingled on his tongue. He drank the water, cool as mercy itself. In that moment, he understood that healing begins in small acts, in bread shared, in water offered, in truth spoken. He raised the cup to the crowd. "This is our covenant," he said, voice steady, "to share our bread, to welcome the weary, to listen to voices long silenced. If you believe that mercy is more than a word, that compassion must guide our path, then walk with us." He let the words hang, an invitation as clear as white smoke against blue sky. A gentle clap rolled through the assembly, one hand, then many, until the chapel doors echoed with applause, not for a man or a vote, but for a promise made real. Paolo's eyes stung with tears, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. He felt Matteo there, in every clap, every breath of wind, every ray of light that danced on marble. As the crowd dispersed into the square, Paolo lingered at the threshold, hand resting on the cold stone. He closed his eyes, letting the moment etch itself into his heart. The dove had not returned yet, but its lesson lived in every choice they had made today. Tomorrow would bring another vote, another test of resolve. But today they had answered the call. Today they had remembered how to feel, how to act, how to serve. If you believe that even the smallest gestures can spark a revolution of compassion, join this journey, subscribe, share, and be part of a story where mercy triumphs over fear. What comes next is the promise we carry together. A hush fell over St. Peter's Square as Cardinal Moretti stepped onto the balcony, the morning sun painting his cassock in hues of amber. Below, the crowd pressed close, faces upturned with the same mixture of awe and anticipation he felt stirring in his own chest. He held the silver chalice in one hand and the battered ledgers in the other, symbols of both confession and covenant. Behind him, the chapel doors stood open like a mouth waiting to speak. He raised the chalice to catch the light, letting it glow like a beacon. Then he set it gently on a marble pedestal carved with ivy and angels. The ledgers lay beside it, their pages fanned as if eager to tell their tales. For a moment, the world felt suspended between breath and exhale, as though every soul present was leaning forward, waiting for the next word. But the moment snapped like a twig underfoot when the High Guard's trumpet cut through the air, an official summons that pulled the conclave's attention back toward the hidden corridors. Paolo exchanged a glance with Cardinal Velez, whose youthful face was pale with both curiosity and dread. They both knew the summons meant one thing: a formal report was demanded. Someone intended to challenge the very act of exposing those records. Inside, the chamber doors thudded shut, sealing the cardinals in their sacred council. Paolo followed the slender path through candlelit aisles, the scent of melting wax mingling with incense. Every step echoed his heartbeat. As the doors closed behind him, the glow of stained glass dimmed, and he found himself bathed in shadow. At the center of the conclave, 3 senior cardinals sat with brows furrowed, their glares sharp enough to carve stone. Cardinal Benedictus leaned forward, voice low and prophetic. "You have upended centuries of protocol, Moretti. You have exposed our vulnerabilities to the world outside. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Paolo stood straighter, voice steady. "I understand that the Church cannot heal while it hides its wounds. I understand that faith is broken when trust is broken. I will not apologize for seeking truth." A murmur rolled through the assembly. Some bristled, others nodded in silent support. Cardinal Benedictus's lips tightened into a thin line. Behind him, an aide slid into place, bearing a sealed parchment stamped with a Vatican seal. Paolo accepted it, breaking the wax with deliberate calm. Inside lay a petition signed by dozens of cardinals demanding an emergency motion to censure him, to remove him from the voting rolls, and to overturn today's commitments to transparency. Paolo's breath caught, but he felt the ghosts of every silenced voice lending him strength. He raised the chalice from its pedestal and held it before the assembly. Its polished surface reflected their faces, some skeptical, some resolute, some torn by conscience. He pressed the chalice to his lips and whispered a blessing for gentleness of heart. "I stand by the truth we have sworn to uphold. This chalice and these records bear witness to mercy," he said, voice ringing like a bell. "If any man here seeks to punish me, Let him know that my penalty is already paid and every child left unheard, every widow left destitute, every soul abandoned in darkness." Cardinal Velez rose, his voice unexpectedly strong. "And if we allow fear to dictate our actions, what will become of the flock we're meant to guide?" Heads turned. Velez's words cut through tension like a sword of light. Do we defend tradition at the cost of compassion, or do we embrace change in the name of love? The assembly fell silent. Paolo felt the scales shift. Beneath high vaults, compassion and fear waged their ancient duel. Minutes stretched, punctuated only by the distant tolling of a bell, echoes of a world beyond these walls waiting. Then came the decisive voice. Cardinal Aurelia, a woman of quiet dignity, whose years of service were etched in silver lines around her eyes. She leaned forward, gaze steady on Moretti. "Cardinal, your actions have reminded us that holiness is found not in hiding our sins, but in offering them up for healing. I second the commitment to transparency. I ask each of you to stand with us or stand aside." Her words were a summons of conscience. One by one, cardinals began to stand, some with hesitant steps, others with sudden clarity. The petition lay forgotten on a side table as the assembly coalesced around the vow to champion accountability. Paolo felt a rush of relief, tempered by the knowledge that this was both an ending and a beginning. As the final votes solidified their pledge, the doors of the chapel swung open, releasing a flood of dawn light that washed over them like baptism. Paolo crossed to the ledgers and placed a single white dove feather atop the open pages, a symbol of the avian sentinel that had guided him here. He turned to face the chapel doors, now aflame with color as the rising sun ignited the stained glass. Beyond the doors, the square hushed again. He stepped outside, joining the murmuring crowd. Eyes followed him, not as a cardinal in cassock, but as a man transformed by resolve. Children pointed, nuns whispered psalms, tourists lowered their cameras, unsure whether they were witnessing tradition or revolution. Paolo lifted his chin, letting the breeze tousle his silver hair. He felt the weight of his brother's prayer beads heavy in his pocket, a reminder that every journey begins with a single step of faith. He reached into his pocket and extracted one bead, holding it between thumb and forefinger as though cradling a promise. He spoke softly, though everyone near could hear. "We chose mercy today. Now we must live it." A ripple of affirmation spread through the crowd. From the chapel, a faint flutter caught his ear, an unseen dove taking wing. Paolo watched until the bird became a speck against the Roman sky. Then he turned back to those awaiting him. He traced a slow circle with his gaze, drinking in the faces shaped by hope. His heart thundered, not with triumph, but with anticipation. The battle for compassion was far from over. Dark corridors still beckoned with secrets to unearth, and around the world the faithful looked for signs that their church would keep its promise. Paolo tucked the chalice beneath his arm and lifted the ledgers like a shield against indifference. He took a steady step forward, moving through the crowd toward a life of renewed purpose. The morning sun lit his path, but he walked not for himself. He walked for every soul whose silent plea had finally been heard. And as he disappeared into the arches of the Vatican, the square remained hushed, ever watchful for the next flutter of wings. The evening sky over the Vatican glowed like molten gold, clouds painted in bruised purples and fiery oranges. Cardinal Moretti stepped into the courtyard, the silver chalice cradled in one arm, the ledgers in the other. Lanterns flickered along the cobblestones, casting dancing shadows that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the city. He paused beneath an ancient archway, carved with scenes of martyrdom and mercy, closing his eyes as the first notes of a distant hymn drifted on the air, soft, sorrowful, resilient. He remembered the weight of those first days, the ache in his knee from old wounds, the ache in his heart from wounds unseen. He remembered Matteo's laughter in sunlit olive groves, the hush of a child's prayer in a refugee camp, the hush of a silent chapel packed with secrets. And above all, he remembered the dove, steadfast against wind and storm, silent until it spoke through action. Tonight, he would fulfill the vow he had made beneath its unblinking gaze. The square was nearly empty, save for a handful of janitors sweeping lantern ashes and a young Swiss guard pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. Paolo set down the chalice and ledgers on a low marble bench. He drew a breath, steady and deliberate, and opened the ledgers. Candlelight trembled across names inked in neat rows, dioceses, towns, parishes where aid had vanished, where children went uncounted, where the most vulnerable had been abandoned. He placed his hand on the open pages, the leather cover rough beneath his palm. He could feel the weight of every life represented, widows waiting for rations, orphans sleeping in cold dormitories, old men begging at church doors, each a cry into the void. Tonight, he would carry their voices beyond these walls. A soft coo drew his eyes upward. There, perched on the cornice, was the dove, its white plumage glowing in lantern light, eyes reflecting both moon and purpose. Paolo's breath caught. The bird had returned. It cocked its head as if urging him onward. He closed the ledgers and lifted the chalice high. 4 slow steps brought him to the center of the courtyard's mosaic, a circle of blue and gold, the earth cradled by angels. He knelt, lips brushing the marble, and whispered a prayer for guidance, for courage, for the strength to stand for every forgotten soul. He rose and began to speak, voice clear in the hush of night. This chalice once held only wine. Tonight it holds our promise. These ledgers once lay hidden. Tonight they stand as testament. We are called to serve beyond this conclave, beyond these walls, wherever mercy is scarce and hope flickers like a dying candle. The dove fluttered down, alighting on the rim of the chalice. Paolo paused, heart pounding, and let the moment settle into memory. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. He heard footsteps on cobblestone. 1, 2, then many. The janitors had stopped work. The Swiss guard had lowered his spear. In the shadows, cloaks rustled as cardinals emerged, drawn by the gravity of Paolo's vow. They formed a loose semicircle around him, faces solemn in the lantern haze. Paolo met their eyes one by one. Fear, determination, regret, hope. He held the chalice forward, offering it to them, inviting their pledge. "Will you carry this promise into the world with me?" he asked, voice echoing against the ancient stones. Silence bloomed, profound and expectant. Then a cardinal stepped forward, hands trembling, and placed his palm against the chalice. A murmur followed as others joined, until each had touched it, an unspoken covenant sealed in moonlight and steel. Paolo lowered the chalice and opened the ledgers once more. He traced lines of ink with reverent fingers. "We begin tomorrow," he said. "We will publish these records, deliver aid where it was withheld, rebuild what was broken. We will journey to parishes in need, listen to stories long buried, speak truths once silenced." A gust of wind snuffed one lantern, another guttered. The dove spread its wings, fluffed against the chill, and cooed softly. Its presence anchored Paolo's resolve. This was no longer just a conclave decision. It was a living movement of compassion, calling him into the world beyond marble floors and painted ceilings. He closed the ledgers and lifted the chalice. "May this be the first of many acts of mercy," he prayed. Water from the fountain at his feet shimmered, reflecting the chalice's curve. He dipped a finger into the water and let droplets fall like blessings on the ledger's pages. A lone trumpet sounded, a signal echoing from the basilica steps. Paolo looked up as the Swiss guard approached, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes bright. "Cardinal," he said, voice hushed, "the people in the square await word. They've heard of your promise." Paolo nodded, breath catching. "Then let us speak truth to them." He turned and strode to the edge of the courtyard, the cardinals trailing behind like witnesses. The crowd had gathered again, drawn by lantern light and whispered rumors. Faces packed the railings, mothers with children on their shoulders, old men leaning on canes, students craning their necks. They held candles, phones, leaflets, anything that could carry a message. Paolo stepped forward, ledgers in hand. He cleared his throat, the hush so complete he could hear the hammering of his own heart. "People of Rome," he called, voice firm. "Tonight, your church has remembered why it exists, not for power, not for politics, but for mercy." He held the ledgers aloft. "These records show our failures and our promises. Tomorrow we will share these truths. Tomorrow we will stand among you, not as distant shepherds, but as servants in your midst." A ripple of astonishment swept through the crowd. Paolo saw tears in the eyes of nuns, heard the collective intake of breath from families who had given up hope. He felt the presence of every soul who had ever felt abandoned by faith. He held their gaze steadily. "We will not hide behind walls any longer," he vowed. "We will bring healing to the broken, justice to the oppressed, and hope to the forgotten." This chalice, these ledgers, are more than symbols. They are our covenant with you. He placed the ledgers gently on a wooden crate, then set the chalice beside them. Lantern light glinted off its silver surface, throwing fractured patterns on the stone. A silence as deep as prayer settled over the square. Then a single candle was held aloft, its tiny flame a signal. One by one, phones raised their lights. Candles flickered like stars reborn. The dove cooed from the arch above, wings spread in a silent benediction. Paolo lowered his head, chest swelling with an emotion he could only call sacred. Around him, cardinals joined the crowd, kneeling to touch the ledgers, to lift candles, to clasp hands with faithful and pilgrim alike. The boundary between cleric and layman vanished. All were equal in this moment of shared vow. He glanced upward and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the dove, not to God alone, but to every heart that had dared to hope. Then he stood, shoulders squared, and addressed the crowd one final time. "Bear witness to this moment. Carry this story beyond this square. For mercy sown in silence blossoms only when voices are raised together." The dove lifted from its perch, drifting down to settle on the chalice. Lantern light caught its wings as it cooed, a song of promise. Paolo stepped forward, lifted the chalice to his lips, and drank deeply of water and hope. A murmur rose and swelled into song, hymns of praise, tears of joy, a chorus of voices united across centuries of doubt. Lanterns swung, candles glowed, and the ledgers lay open, ready to be read. Paolo walked slowly through the crowd, sharing bread from his cassock pocket, offering smiles and blessings. Children reached up to touch his hand. Elders whispered thanks. Some clasped the chalice as he passed. Others pressed coins and letters into his palm, a testament of trust. As the night deepened, the crowd began to disperse, voices lingering like incense smoke. The final cardinal stood with Paolo at the courtyard's edge. Cardinal Aurelia, her eyes bright. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given them more than words," she said. "You've given them themselves." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. The dove cooed once more, then lifted, circling above the fading lantern glow before disappearing into the midnight sky. Paolo watched until the last ember of candlelight dimmed, then turned to the ledgers and the chalice. Kneeling, he whispered a vow of his own, to carry this mission wherever mercy was most needed. He stood, brushing dust from his cassock, and stepped into the archway. The courtyard lay silent now, marble cool beneath his feet. In the hush, he could still feel the echo of every promise made this night. He traced a finger along the open ledger, pausing at a young girl's name, an orphan he had met in Naples. He whispered her name into the stone. "We remember you." He rose and walked through the arch, out of the lantern circle and into corridors lit only by the pale glow of dawn. The conclave's work would resume, but Paolo's heart had already journeyed beyond. Into parishes starving for truth, into hospitals aching for compassion, into villages waiting for aid. He paused at a small chapel door where a single dove feather lay on the sill. He picked it up gently, tucking it into his pocket above the prayer beads Matteo once gave him. Then he pushed the door open and stepped inside, the soft sound of wind through stained glass greeting him like a benediction. Light poured in, illuminating dust motes as they danced. Paolo knelt at the altar, closed his eyes, and offered a prayer of gratitude for the dove, for his brother, for every soul whose story he carried. He felt their presence as real as the stone beneath his knees. A moment later, footsteps approached, hesitant and hopeful. He opened his eyes to see the Swiss guard, hands folded. "Command," the young man whispered. Paolo smiled gently. "Gather the rest," he replied. "It's time to serve." Outside, white smoke curled into a clear sky, promising not the end of a conclave, but the beginning of a new chapter, one written in acts of mercy, inked in courage, bound by the memory of a dove that refused to leave. If you believe that one moment of stillness can spark a movement of compassion, hit subscribe, share this story, and join us in carrying the light of mercy into the world. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more powerful emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There's so much more to come.